You have a missing chapter in your life. Not a day, not a week, an entire world. For nearly 3 years, you were awake every day. You saw faces, heard voices, felt fear, laughed, cried, learned thousands of things, and yet it's almost as if those years never happened. Think about that for a second. You can remember your first day at school. You might remember your favorite childhood toy. Some people can even remember being 4 years old, but ask anyone to remember being 6 months old, or 1 year old, or even 2, and something strange happens. There's nothing. So where did those memories go? Did your brain erase them? Were they never created in the first place? Or is there a hidden part of your mind still carrying experiences you'll never consciously remember? The answer isn't just one of the biggest mysteries of childhood. It's one of the biggest mysteries of being human. Let's start with an experiment. In the 1980s, psychologist Dr. Carolyn Rovee-Collier placed a ribbon around a baby's ankle. The other end of the ribbon was tied to a colorful mobile hanging above the crib. At first, the baby kicked randomly. Nothing unusual, but after a few minutes, something incredible happened. The baby discovered that every kick made the mobile dance. Suddenly, the random kicks became deliberate ones. The baby had learned the connection. Now here's the part that stunned scientists. Days later, the same babies were brought back into the room. The moment they saw the mobile again, they started kicking almost immediately. No one showed them what to do. No one reminded them. Somehow, they remembered. Now let's look at a different kind of experiment. Developmental psychologists often use what's called the visual paired comparison test. A baby is shown a picture, perhaps a face. The researchers let the baby look at it for a while. Then later, they show the baby 2 pictures. One is the face they've already seen. The other is completely new. Here's what's fascinating. Babies consistently spend more time looking at the new face. Why? Because they recognize the old one. Think about that. A baby who can't say, "I remember this person," still behaves as though they do. That's memory, not spoken memory, not childhood memories you'll tell your friends years later, but memory nonetheless. So here's the mystery. If babies can remember a moving mobile, recognize familiar faces, learn routines, and even expect certain things to happen, then why can't you remember being 1? Where did those memories go? Did your brain throw them away? Or is something much stranger happening inside your head? Because the answer isn't that babies don't make memories. They absolutely do. The real mystery is why your adult brain can no longer find them. And to understand that, we first need to understand what a memory actually is. Scientists used to believe that childhood memories simply disappeared. Your brain recorded them, then somehow deleted them forever. It sounded reasonable. After all, if you can't remember your first birthday, the memory must be gone, right? But modern neuroscience suggests something much stranger. Let's look at another fascinating experiment. Researchers trained young rats to associate a particular sound with a harmless event. As expected, the rats formed the memory. But as they grew older, they appeared to forget it. For years, scientists assumed the memory had been erased. Then they tried something remarkable, using techniques that reactivated the same group of brain cells involved in the original memory. They found that the forgotten memory could suddenly influence the animal's behavior again. The memory hadn't completely vanished. It had become incredibly difficult to access. Now, humans are obviously far more complex than rats, and we can't assume our brains work in exactly the same way. But experiments like these changed the way neuroscientists think about memory. They introduced an important idea. Sometimes, forgetting isn't about destroying a memory. It's about losing the key to unlock it. Think about an old phone sitting in a drawer. It still contains thousands of photos, messages, videos. Nothing has been deleted. But if you've forgotten the passcode, those memories might as well not exist. Your brain can work in a surprisingly similar way. Psychologists make an important distinction between storing a memory and retrieving one. Storing is like saving a file onto a computer. Retrieving is opening that file years later. Those are 2 completely different processes. And here's where the mystery becomes even more interesting. Your baby brain was surprisingly good at storing experiences. But the system needed to retrieve those experiences was still under construction. It's a bit like writing hundreds of books before you've built the library that knows where to find them. So perhaps the question isn't, why did your brain erase your earliest memories? Perhaps the better question is, was your brain ever able to file them in a way that your future self could find again? And that question leads us to one tiny structure deep inside your brain, a structure no bigger than your thumb, that may hold the biggest clue to this entire mystery. To understand why you can't remember being a baby, we have to meet one of the most famous structures in the human brain. It's called the hippocampus. It's only about the size of your thumb, but without it, your life would feel like a book that keeps resetting after every chapter. Scientists realized just how important the hippocampus was because of one extraordinary patient. His name was Henry Molaison, better known in neuroscience as HM. In 1953, surgeons removed parts of his hippocampus in an attempt to treat his severe epilepsy. The surgery helped his seizures, but it came with a shocking side effect. From that day forward, Henry could still have conversations. He could still recognize people he already knew. He could even learn certain new skills through practice, but he could no longer create lasting memories of new events. Imagine meeting someone, having a wonderful conversation with them, and then, just a few minutes later, meeting them again as if it were the very first time. That became Henry's reality. His case completely transformed neuroscience. It proved that forming a memory and storing a memory are not the same thing. The hippocampus acts like a master organizer. Think of it as the librarian of your brain. Every day, millions of experiences arrive at the library. A laugh, a face, a birthday, the smell of rain. The librarian's job isn't to create those experiences. It's to organize them, label them, and place them somewhere they can be found years later. Now here's where the mystery comes back to you. When you were a baby, your hippocampus wasn't broken. It was still developing. It was learning how to become an expert librarian. That means your earliest experiences weren't meaningless. Your brain was recording them, but the filing system that would allow your future adult self to easily retrieve them wasn't fully ready yet. So the memories weren't necessarily lost because they never mattered. They were created during a time when the brain's memory system was still learning how to organize a lifetime of experiences. But here's the twist. If that's the whole explanation, then there's a problem, because by the age of 2, the hippocampus is working much better. So why can't most of us remember being 2 either? Clearly, the hippocampus isn't the whole story, and the next piece of the puzzle might surprise you even more, because it has nothing to do with memory and everything to do with language. At this point, you might be thinking, so the hippocampus wasn't fully developed. That's true, but it isn't the whole story, because by the age of 3, the hippocampus is far more developed than it was during infancy. Yet ask almost any adult about their second birthday, and you'll probably get the same answer. I don't remember. So psychologists began asking a different question. What changed between a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old besides the brain? The answer kept pointing in the same direction. Language. One of the most influential researchers in this field, developmental psychologist Dr. Katherine Nelson, proposed that our earliest lasting memories depend not only on the brain's ability to store experiences, but also on its ability to turn those experiences into a story. To test this idea, psychologists followed young children over several years. They noticed something remarkable. Children whose parents regularly talked with them about past events, asking questions like, "Do you remember when we went to the zoo?" Or, "What happened after we saw the elephant?" were more likely to remember those experiences years later than children whose parents rarely had those conversations. In other words, memory wasn't developing alone. It was developing alongside conversation. Scientists call this autobiographical memory, the ability to remember events as part of your own life story. And that ability doesn't fully emerge until language, self-awareness, and memory begin working together. Now think about a 1-year-old. They can recognize their mother's face. They know her voice. They know she makes them feel safe. But they can't think. Yesterday, Mom took me to the park and I loved feeding the ducks. Not because the experience didn't happen, but because the brain hasn't yet learned to organize experiences into a personal narrative. Imagine visiting the most beautiful city you've ever seen, but taking no photos, writing no diary, and telling nobody about the trip. Years later, fragments might remain. A feeling, a smell, a flash of color, but the complete story slowly fades. That's surprisingly similar to what happens during infancy. The experiences were real. The emotions were real. But the brain hadn't yet built the storytelling system that allows those moments to become lifelong memories, which leads to an even bigger question. If you can't consciously remember your earliest years, could those years still be shaping who you are today? Because according to modern psychology, the answer is a resounding yes. Here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. What if I told you that some of your most important memories are the ones you'll never remember? It sounds impossible. How can a memory shape your life if you can't even recall it? Psychologists have been asking that same question for decades, and the answer lies in something called implicit memory. Most people think memory is just remembering birthdays, your first day at school, or where you left your keys. Scientists now know memory is much more complicated than that. Broadly speaking, your brain stores memories in different ways. There's explicit memory, the memories you can consciously describe. I remember my graduation. I remember learning to ride a bike. Then there's implicit memory. These are memories that quietly influence your behavior without you ever realizing they're there. Let's look at one of the clearest examples. A famous psychological experiment called the still face experiment, developed by psychologist Dr. Edward Tronick, involved a parent playing normally with their baby. The baby smiled. The parent smiled back. Everything looked completely ordinary. Then, without warning, the parent stopped responding. No smile, no eye contact, no expression, just a completely still face. What happened next surprised many people. At first, the baby smiled even more, trying to get the parent's attention. When nothing happened, the baby pointed, reached out, made sounds. And when the parent still didn't respond, many babies became distressed. Some even cried. Why is this experiment so important? Because it revealed something extraordinary. Long before babies can speak, they're already learning what to expect from the people around them. Their brain is constantly asking questions like, when I smile, does someone smile back? When I'm scared, does someone comfort me? Is the world safe? Those lessons become part of the brain long before they're old enough to form lasting autobiographical memories. Think of it like learning to walk. You probably don't remember the day you learned your first step, but your body remembers. You don't have to relearn walking every morning. In the same way, your earliest experiences help shape how you react to the world, even if you can never replay those moments in your mind. Psychologists believe many of the foundations of trust, emotional security, and social connection begin forming during these early years, not because babies remember those moments as stories, but because their brains are quietly learning patterns that become part of who they are. So maybe your earliest memories were never meant to be watched like an old movie. Maybe they were meant to become you. And that leads us to perhaps the biggest question of all. If your earliest experiences helped shape the person you became, why would the brain allow you to forget them in the first place? By now, we've uncovered something surprising. Babies do make memories. Their brains do learn from experience. And those experiences continue shaping them long after they've forgotten them. So here's the question that puzzled scientists for decades. If those early memories are so important, why doesn't the brain keep them? At first, researchers believed the answer was simple. The brain was immature. End of story. But modern neuroscience paints a much more fascinating picture. One of the biggest discoveries came from studying what happens inside a baby's brain during the first few years of life. During this period, the brain is growing at an astonishing speed. Neuroscientists estimate that in early childhood, the brain forms more than 1 million new neural connections every second. Think about that. While you're watching this video, a baby's brain could have already built millions of new connections. That's an incredible amount of construction. But here's something many people don't know. The brain doesn't just build, it also remodels. Scientists call this process synaptic pruning. Imagine planting an entire forest. At first, thousands of tiny branches grow in every direction. Some become strong. Others never get used. Over time, the brain trims away the weaker connections while strengthening the ones used most often. It's surprisingly similar to clearing hundreds of little footpaths through a forest until only the busiest roads remain. The goal isn't to erase information. The goal is to make the brain faster and more efficient. Researchers now believe this massive reorganization may also make it harder to access many of our earliest autobiographical memories, not because they weren't important, but because the brain itself was being rebuilt. Think about renovating a huge library. The books aren't necessarily destroyed. They're constantly being moved, reorganized, and placed onto entirely new shelves. For a while, finding one specific book becomes almost impossible. Your early brain was going through a similar transformation. It wasn't simply collecting memories. It was redesigning the entire system that stores them. Psychologists often describe childhood as the period when the brain is learning one essential question: what information will I need for the rest of my life? The answer isn't every single moment. It's the patterns, the skills, the relationships, the emotions. Those are the things the brain chooses to protect, which means something extraordinary. Maybe your brain didn't fail to remember your childhood. Maybe it remembered exactly what mattered most, just not in the way you expected. And that leads us to the final piece of this mystery. Because once you understand what your brain decided to keep, you'll finally understand why forgetting your earliest years may have been one of the smartest things your brain ever did. After everything we've uncovered, the answer is probably very different from what you expected. You can't remember being a baby, not because those years weren't important, but because your brain had a much more important job to do. It had to build you. Let's take one last journey inside your brain. Imagine walking into a city that's still under construction. New roads are being built every second. Old roads are being removed. Entire neighborhoods are being redesigned overnight. Yet somehow, millions of people are still trying to live there. That sounds impossible, but that's surprisingly close to what's happening inside a baby's brain. During the first few years of life, neuroscientists estimate that the brain forms more than 1 million new neural connections every second. At the same time, it's strengthening useful pathways while removing weaker ones through a process called synaptic pruning. Your brain isn't simply collecting memories, it's redesigning itself. Now here's where the mystery becomes even more fascinating. Scientists have another leading theory for infantile amnesia. It's called infant neurogenesis. During infancy, the hippocampus, the part of the brain responsible for forming new memories, is producing enormous numbers of brand new neurons. That sounds like a good thing, and it is. But imagine writing your life story in a notebook, while someone keeps inserting hundreds of blank pages between the pages you've already written. The words are still there, but finding the beginning becomes harder and harder. Studies in animals have shown that when researchers increase the production of new neurons after a memory forms, those earlier memories become much harder to retrieve later. Neuroscientists are still studying exactly how this process works in humans, but many believe this constant rebuilding of the infant hippocampus is one reason our earliest autobiographical memories become inaccessible. Then there's another important part of the brain quietly growing in the background: the prefrontal cortex. Think of it as your brain's editor. The hippocampus records experiences. The prefrontal cortex organizes them into a story. This happened yesterday. This happened to me. This happened before that. Babies don't yet have a fully developed editor. They experience moments, not chapters. Feelings, not life stories. Which explains something psychologists have been saying for years. Your brain wasn't trying to preserve every single moment. It was trying to discover the rules of the world. Instead of asking, how do I remember this forever? Your baby brain was asking, what can I learn from this? That's a completely different mission, and that's why the individual memories may have faded, while the lessons remained. So, what parts of your babyhood are still living inside you today? More than you probably realize. You may not remember the first time your mother smiled at you, but your brain learned that faces matter. You may not remember the first time someone picked you up when you cried, but your brain learned whether the world responds when you need help. You don't remember learning your native language, yet every sentence you speak is built on foundations laid during those forgotten years. You don't remember discovering that objects fall, that people come back after leaving the room, or that a familiar voice can make you feel safe. But those discoveries became part of the operating system of your mind. Your earliest memories didn't disappear because they were unimportant. They disappeared because they had already done their job. They stopped being stories and became you. Your first memories didn't disappear. They became the person who's watching this video right now. Every human mystery has a beginning, and that beginning is childhood. If you enjoyed discovering one of the greatest mysteries hidden inside your own mind, subscribe, because the next mystery starts at the very beginning of being human.